Hi everyone, I'm Dwayne Costa. I'm a developer with the Environmental Data Initiative, and the topic of today's presentation is using checksums to speed up data package uploads. So I'm going to share my screen. Is that coming through?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay. I've organized this presentation into 6 parts. First, we're going to talk about what are checksums. Then we're going to look at how checksums are used in PASTA and the EDI repository. If I'm an information manager, how do I document checksums in my EML metadata? We're going to look at checksums and their relationship to PASTA's congruence checker. Then we're going to look at evaluate and upload of data packages, a brief review, first via the PASTA Web Services API, and then via the data portal. And finally, sort of the highlight of this presentation, the useChecksum optimization, what it is, under what conditions is it most effective to use it. If I choose to use it as an information manager, how do I activate it? And what should I be careful with when using it? Our intended audience today are all information managers, particularly those who use PASTA or the data portal to evaluate and upload data packages, or anyone who'd like a little additional insight into how PASTA manages its data. First, a brief clarification of some terms. When we refer to PASTA, also known as PASTA Plus, we're referring to the servers and software that drive, manage, power, choose your verb, the EDI repository. PASTA is exposed to the outside world through a suite of RESTful web services as documented by the PASTA Web Services API. PASTA Plus is the latest incarnation of PASTA, which continues to support the LTER community. It also supports a broader set of communities, including LTREB, MSB, OBFS, and others. The EDI repository is the actual curated content, primarily in the form of metadata, that is EML, Dublin Core, and data. The data portals, of which there are 2, the EDI data portal and the LTER data portal, are both web applications that interact with but are separate from the EDI repository and PASTA. By using the data portal, end users can interact with the EDI repository without concerning themselves with PASTA web services, though the data portal code itself makes extensive use of those web services. These 2 data portals look very similar and they interact with the same EDI repository, but their features and functionality are beginning to diverge over time. Let's look at checksums. Here is a Wikipedia description of a checksum. For our purposes, when we have data in a file and we want to transmit that data to another place, we can run a program on that file that generates a really big hexadecimal value based on the data file's exact contents. Then on the receiving end, they can run that same program and they would expect to get the same really big hexadecimal value. The programs we'll be looking at, MD5 and SHA-1, strictly speaking, are hash functions, not checksum algorithms, but the 2 terms are often interchanged, so we'll simply refer to them as checksums. Once again, with a little help from Wikipedia, the takeaway here is that the MD5 algorithm always generates a 128-bit, 16-byte hash value, which is usually rendered as a 32-digit hexadecimal value. SHA-1 generates a 160-bit or 20-byte hash value, which is usually rendered as a 40-digit hexadecimal number. So in both cases, you'll see these long strings of hexadecimal digits, 0 through 9 and A through F, and that's what we refer to as the checksum. Here's an example, a screenshot from my Windows command window. Oh, you know, I wanted to use that laser pointer. If I could find it here. Gee, I'm not sure where it is.
Maybe towards the bottom of the screen, if you move your
cursor.
Oh,
yeah, okay, yeah, there it is. Thank you. Okay, so I created a small text file called animal.txt. Oops, let me go back. Okay, here's the example. I created a small file called animal.txt. It's 3 bytes long, and it contains the 3 characters CAT, 3-byte ASCII characters. When I run a program called FCIV-MD5, which is a Windows program on animal.txt, the file checksum integrity verifier gives me this 32-digit hexadecimal number. I'll refer to this as the D0 through D0 D8 value, and that's the MD5 for my 3-byte animal.txt file. Changing the file name doesn't change the checksum. It's really about the contents of the file, and so I copied my animal.txt to another animal.txt and reran the FCIV program on both of those files, and they both turn up the D0 D8 value. Changing the platform also doesn't change the value. We should get the same result on Linux as on Windows. So on Linux, I move that same file over through FTP. I run a different command this time, md5sum on animal.txt, and I get the D0 .d8 value. There are also web tools. Here's a web page from something called miraclesalad.com. And I typed in the string CAT, and it immediately gave me the MD5 hash D0 .d8. There are desktop utilities. This one I just downloaded this morning. It's a small Windows program, the MD5 and SHA checksum utility 2.1. And with this one, I can browse to a file on my system. So I browsed to animal.txt, and it immediately gave me these 4 different values for MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, and SHA-512. It's a small Windows GUI program that you can download, and a link will be provided on the resources slide at the end of this presentation. I noticed, however, that it represents its hexadecimal digits, A through F, in uppercase. And then I thought about this and checked the PASTA database and found that PASTA stores those digits in lowercase. When PASTA is comparing its values, currently it checks for an exact match, including case, but I think we need to modify this to ignore case because it's still the same hexadecimal number, regardless of whether it's represented with uppercase A through F or lowercase a through F. So I believe we need to fix this so that PASTA will accept either representation. And I'm wondering from the audience here, have any of you attempted to document checksums in your EML and run into a problem because PASTA insisted on accepting only lowercase a through F, and you had to change your value to uppercase a through F? I'm sorry, the reverse. It had uppercase a through F in the tool that you used, and it forced you to change it to lowercase a through F.
In fact, we did run into this issue at the training session we just held when, using the Windows desktop checksum tools. Okay, interesting. It was just an oversight when coding this, and it says, fortunately, it's a very quick one-line fix. We just need to, when we're doing the congruency, check that it's equals ignore case as opposed to equals. Of course, changing the content does change the checksum. So if I edit my animal.txt and I change it to RAT, R-A-T, instead of C-A-T, and I rerun FCIV-MD5 on it, I get a completely different looking value, E7.11. So this kind of demonstrates what could happen if during transmission in a data file, a few ones got changed to zeros or zeros got changed to ones, and you ended up with a different content. It might be the same size, so you can't rely on comparing the sizes of the thing that got transmitted. You have to actually run these checksums to check the exact content. How are checksums used in PASTA? Currently in 3 ways. They're used for disk space optimization for data entities. So when there are 2 or more data entities in different revisions of the same data package that are identical based on their same hash values or checksums, PASTA links them together using hard links. There's only one physical copy on the disk, but there may be multiple hard links to that one copy. For data integrity, if I document in my metadata that a data entity has checksum X, and the data entity that Pasta downloads from my online URL has checksum Y, then it means that either the data was corrupted during transit or that I have documented the incorrect checksum. In either case, this lack of congruence between the metadata and the data will cause one of the quality checks to fail with an error status. And finally, the download optimization. This is a brand new feature, what we're calling the useChecksum optimization, and this is the main topic of this presentation. So from an information manager's perspective, what does an IM need to do to help Pasta utilize checksums? For disk space optimization, nothing. Pasta is doing this on its own to manage its disk space more efficiently. For data integrity, we'll need to calculate data entity checksums and document them in the EML. More details will follow. For download optimization, we need to calculate data entity checksums and document them into the EML. And then we need to activate the useChecksum optimization when evaluating a data package or updating a data package to a new revision, and more details to follow. So how do I document checksums in my EML? Under a data entity, be it a data table or an other entity or spatial vector, spatial raster entities, and there are a couple others, you'll find a physical element, and under that there is an optional authentication element. And so we say authentication method equals, and the hash function or checksum method, in this case I'm using SHA-1, then my 40-digit hexadecimal value, and that's it. That's how we document it. Or this could have been a 32-digit MD5 value instead, in which case we would have said method equals MD5. Tools for calculating these checksum values, I've already seen a few. The file checksum integrity verifier, which is, there'll be a link where it can be downloaded from Microsoft in the resources slide at the end. On Linux, there are commands named MD5sum and SHA-1sum. On Mac OS X, there are similar commands, but they're named MD5 and SHA-sum. Programming languages have various libraries and modules. In Java, we've been using the digest utils library, which is available from Apache Commons. Python has a hashlib module, and I'm sure other programming languages have their own modules and libraries. We've seen the online web tool from Miracle Salad and the desktop GUI tool MD5 and SHA checksum utility for Windows. A wide variety of checksum calculator tools available covering different platforms and programming languages. I've probably only scratched the surface with what I've listed on this slide. What is the relationship between checksums and Pasta's congruence checker? The documentation of data entity checksums in EML is encouraged but not required. There are two relevant quality checks which were introduced into Pasta in May of 2017. The first is the integrity checksum presence. It looks only at the metadata to see whether or not a checksum was documented. And the second, integrity checksum, checks for the actual congruence between the documented checksum and the actual data that was downloaded by Pasta from the online URL. If you elect not to document a data entity checksum, the first check just issues a warn, but that does not block data package upload. If you choose to document a data entity checksum, but the data downloaded by Pasta is not congruent with your documented checksum value, the second check issues an error, which does block upload. And here's some snippets from quality reports to demonstrate this. In this first instance, I failed to document any form of checksum, and I had the warn issued. It was expecting at least one of those checksums, found that no authentication element was found for that data entity. In the second instance, I intentionally documented an incorrect checksum. Pasta calculated the SHA-1 checksum and got the 915.ef5 value, which is the correct checksum for my data entity. I intentionally documented a bad checksum, the 815.ef4 value, and so that generated this error condition where the two values are incongruent. Let's quickly look at evaluation and upload of data packages. Our focus is on three operations: evaluating a data package, creating a data package with its initial revision value, which is often 1, but not necessarily. For example, edi.15.1, and updating a data package to a higher revision value, but not necessarily contiguous. That is, it could go up to, you could go from .1 to edi.15.3 if you, I think Deems skips revision values and uses these very large revision values. Is there anyone on the call who is not familiar with the package ID conventions that we typically use in EML documents, where package ID is a scope.identifier.revision value? If not, I'll just proceed forward, assuming everyone understands what I'm referring to here. Okay. All three of these operations can take a long time to complete for data packages that contain very large data entities. Two of these three operations can potentially finish dramatically faster using the new Pasta Plus feature we call the useChecksum optimization. So some of you may have already figured this out, but which of the three operations does this optimization not apply to? Don't give it away yet. Stay tuned. So let's look at the, for completeness, let's briefly look at the Pasta Web Service APIs for evaluating and uploading. That is, when I say uploading, I mean creating or updating data packages to the EDI repository. In practice, most information managers, I suspect, will use the data portal for performing these operations. The data portal, in turn, uses the Pasta Web Services depicted here with their formal APIs. Create data package and update data package, kind of as a side note, are more generally known as upload operations because they add new data packages to the EDI repository. Evaluate data package doesn't upload anything permanent to the repository, so we don't refer to it as an upload operation. Though if you think about it in another sense, metadata and data do need to get uploaded to Pasta in order to perform the evaluation. But after the evaluation completes, the metadata and data aren't saved for an evaluate, and so we don't call it an upload. In the data portal, these operations are supported on a page that includes a pair of buttons, evaluate and upload, where upload includes both create data package and update data package. And the data portal figures out automatically based on inspecting the package ID of your data package. Then it checks Pasta to see, do we already have a previous revision of that data package? If the answer is yes, we do, then it does an update. If the answer is no, this is the first revision of that data package, then we do a create. But they're both covered by the button called upload. Evaluate, on the other hand, has its own dedicated button. Finally, the culmination of this presentation, part 6, the useChecksum optimization. How does the useChecksum optimization work? So when it is activated, and we'll talk about how that happens, Pasta compares the EML documented checksum with recorded checksums of all data entities from previous revisions of that same data package lineage. So if Pasta finds a data entity from a previous revision with a matching checksum, it bypasses download of the data entity from your documented online URL and instead uses a copy of the previous revision's data entity. Now, it doesn't actually create a new physical copy. Instead, it uses a hard link to an existing data file from a previous revision. Very much the same way like that disk space optimization I mentioned earlier works. If Pasta does not find a match, it simply downloads the data entity from your documented online URL, just as it normally would when the useChecksum optimization is not selected. This optimization could be potentially applicable when evaluating a data package or updating a data package to a new revision, but not when creating a new data package. And if you've probably already figured out, it's pretty obvious. That's because there are no previous revisions when you're creating a new data package. For the web services, the way we activate the useChecksum optimization is to tack on a query parameter, question mark, useChecksum. And so we're saying, hey, Pasta, evaluate my data package, but in this case, use my checksums to speed it up if you can. So for evaluate data package, it's sometimes useful and makes sense to activate useChecksum, since there may or may not be a previous revision of the data package already in the repository. As I mentioned, for a create data package, it never makes sense. So I've depicted it here without the useChecksum query parameter, because if you put it on, it would just be ignored. And for update data package, it often makes sense, since we know there was at least one previous revision of the data package in the repository, and that previous revision or revisions may or may not have data entities with checksums that match the new revision that is being uploaded. So finally, here we go in the data portal. Here's where the action is. Here's where it happens. There's a checkbox under data upload options. And when it's checked, that's how the data portal activates useChecksum and tacks on that question mark useChecksum parameter for the web service that it composes and sends to Pasta. So question, what if I click upload and it's actually doing a create instead of an update, but I've checked the allow Pasta to skip upload of a data entity if it has a matching copy? Answer is it's not a problem. That checkbox is simply ignored if it happens to be a create. So let's look at some use cases when it makes the most sense to use the useChecksum optimization. If you're doing a metadata-only update to your data package, and you know that all the data entities are exactly the same as in the previous revision, and you're thinking, these are big data entities, why should Pasta bother to download them again from my site if it's already got a copy? That's a good use case for activating it. If you're doing a mostly metadata-only update to a data package, you know at least some of the data entities are the same. You can let Pasta decide which ones to download and which ones to skip, and it will do that automatically for you. If you have at least one very large data entity that has not changed since the last revision, although many of the data entities may have changed, but this one particular 20 gigabyte beast is the same as before, you can let Pasta decide not to download that particular one, saving you some time and saving the network, your network and ours, a lot of bandwidth. A few related questions and answers. When can you start using this? The question came up, I think it may have been Gastel who asked this. If I start using checksums for the first time with the revision N of my data package, is it still worthwhile to select the useChecksum optimization since there are no checksums to compare to in my EML for any of the previous revisions 1 through N-1? The answer is yes, it could still be worthwhile because Pasta has already calculated both MD5 and SHA-1 values for all data entities in the EDI repository, and it has these values stored in a database table. So Pasta will compare your EML documented value in revision N to all of its stored values for previous revisions 1 through N-1, assuming you use a sequence. Not everybody does. Of the given data package until it finds a match. It will only skip download if it does find a match. Another question, if I use checksum is selected and Pasta finds a match to a previous revision, will quality checks still be run on the data entity? And the answer is yes. The full suite of quality checks will still be run on the data entity. Since the metadata may have changed, Pasta still needs to check the congruence between the metadata and the data, even if the data entity hasn't changed. The only thing that is potentially bypassed by useChecksum is download over the network by Pasta from your online URL. Everything else is processed in exactly the same way. A kind of a related question, if useChecksum is selected and Pasta finds a match to a previous revision, will Pasta skip loading my data table into a relational database? The answer is no, since loading the data into a database table is one of the quality checks for congruence, it will still be run. That means that for very large data table entities, they may still take a long time to process even when useChecksum is applied. Even though PASTA may not be downloading the data entity over the network, it will still be inserting the data using its own copy from a previous revision into a database table one row at a time. So you probably won't notice much of a speed up with a data table that has, say, 1 million or more records. So here's what to be careful with when selecting the useChecksum optimization. So keep in mind that when you select the useChecksum optimization, you are allowing PASTA to bypass download of data entities from the documented online URL in your EML. PASTA will have no way of verifying that the checksum you've documented in your EML is the same as the checksum of the data entity at the online URL. To verify this, it would have to download it and inspect the data entity, but the whole point of the optimization is to bypass the download and instead use a copy of the data entity that already exists in PASTA's repository. So if you select the checkbox or use the question mark useChecksum parameter, query parameter, please double check, maybe even triple check, to ensure that your documented checksum is up to date and not based on a previous revision of the data entity that has since changed. Avoid copy and pasting the checksum value from a previous revision unless you are certain that the data entity has not changed since that revision. So watch out for those copy and paste mistakes. So what could possibly go wrong? What if my data entity has changed, but I forget to update the checksum value in the EML, and then I select useChecksum, the useChecksum option? Here are the potentially bad consequences. PASTA may end up using a data entity from a previous revision, which is not the data entity you intended for this data package. If this happens, the best outcome is that the data package update will fail with errors because the metadata and data are now incongruent. The worst outcome is that the data package update will succeed with the wrong data entity now in place in the repository. And I would think that there's a higher risk of this with data entities that are not data tables, such as other entities, spatial raster, spatial vector, because there's less of a chance that they would be considered incongruent. So the bottom line, take advantage of the useChecksum, but use with care. And finally, there's the resources slide, which I know you can't copy and paste this off this screen, but will it be available when these slides are made available in EDI? Thank you, and happy evaluating and uploading. And we'll turn it over back to Colin to mediate the question and answers. Thank you.
Great, Dwayne. Thanks a lot for explaining this new feature of the EDI data portal. Yeah, are there any questions out there or any things that people would like to discuss?
Hey, Colin, I have a couple of comments. First, I thought Dwayne did an excellent job of going over the subtleties of using the useChecksum. And I would just want to reemphasize a point that Dwayne made, that the useChecksum, if you use this feature, it does, and if used appropriately, it does reduce the overall processing time to actually move data from your site, the source of that data, to PASTA when it does the quality checks, but it does not mitigate the time of the quality check processing. So if most of the time is loaded in quality checks, which really are the database loading and data type checking on a line-by-line basis of your data file, if it's a tabular file, you may not see an overall improvement. It's just gonna, the mileage may vary, I think, as Dwayne, as I would paraphrase kind of Dwayne's comments. The other comment is a little bit more subtle. When you calculate hash values on your data files, it is encoding dependent. So if your data files may look on presentation to be the same, but if you store them in different text encodings, you will indeed get different checksum or hash values, because UTF-8 or UTF-16 store values differently than, say, just plain old ASCII text. So you have to recognize the fact that, you know, just the representation of cat, depending on what the encoding is, it may vary with your checksum. So you just can't make an assumption that they are going to be the same.
But Mark, I mean, would that encoding change by downloading it across the network?
It varies depending on how the file is physically encoded, you know, at the source.
And I think Suzanne and Andrews ran into this kind of issue that took a little work to resolve.
Oh, we got it fixed. I have a question about, you know, you showed on the data portal, you showed where you can select the checksum. And my question is, why have that at all? Why? I mean, you gave the reasons why it's dangerous not to do it and the problems you could run into, but it seems like those are cautionary things that you might not think of. You're going to check it anyways, and that's going to happen. So it just seems like, why not just always use the optimization?
Oh, well, the risks involved only come with the optimization. So by default, we're being kind of a conservative approach here, which is by default, we're letting things be processed slow and everything gets downloaded across the network, but we know we're going to avoid those risks that I described of the bad outcomes. And so we're leaving it to the information manager to decide when you look at your use case for the data entities in this particular data package, and whether if you're doing a metadata only update that you might not want to do if it's going to re-download everything. You may say, I'm not going to bother with just fixing a misspelling in my metadata if it's going to have to go through this entire download again. That might be a use case where you say it's worth taking this risk, but by default, we don't want to force people to take that risk. We want it to be your decision.
Okay, so when you presented that, those two buttons at the bottom,
the two checkboxes?
Yeah, they were for two different things, right? And you could run it with neither of those checked. Is that correct?
That's
so
right.
The default.
The second one is an unrelated feature that I didn't cover, but it's also a data upload option, which is to upload from your desktop instead of from an online URL. And that's it wasn't directly related to the rest of this talk, so I didn't cover it. But yeah, there is that second checkbox there, and that's for that's a feature that's been on the data portal for quite a while. And that's if you don't have an easy way to upload data from URLs at your site to put your data in a place where it's accessible through URL, you can get it right off of your desktop by using that second checkbox. And we've had quite a lot of discussion about whether those two things can actually work well together, and we decided that there may be some cases where they can, that you want to both use the useChecksum optimization and upload from your desktop. I know it doesn't, you have to think about it a lot. We had some discussion in EDI and with other information managers about this, but you probably, that could be a whole separate presentation almost, just to discuss the features of that second checkbox. But what I was emphasizing was the first checkbox.
Okay, and so when you go into that, they are both unchecked. So you have to check it in order to select it.
That's correct, yeah. I had checked it explicitly for that slide, but by default, they are both unchecked.
Okay, my second question has to do with, not really with the checksum thing, but with the evaluate and upload. So you go through the evaluate, and if you have a large data file, you have to evaluate, walk down the hall, go get your lunch, and go to the bathroom, come back. And so if you get a clean report, is there a way to say, go for it, upload that, so it doesn't have to re-upload everything again? and you have to go to the bathroom again and eat a second lunch?
That's a very good question. It's a feature I think it's the first time anybody's described that scenario for us. The premise of the evaluate from the beginning was we're not going to save anything. It's sort of like a sandbox. You can, it's like whatever happens in evaluate, we throw away and we start clean on whatever you do next. And so that's always been sort of the base assumption for evaluate. It doesn't change the repository. We don't save it other than the harvest report that gets saved, so you can go back and look at the old quality report. And so we would have to redesign and rethink is something, is evaluate something that does get temporarily saved and maybe reused.
Dwayne, may I also add to that? So I think the crux of it is somewhat what Dwayne said, though, is that evaluations take place quite often as users try to find the happy, good data set that they want to upload at that point. And our issue with storing all that information is that would consume a lot of our disk space with just evaluates, and especially if they're just never used. So the question is, if you have a successful evaluate, how long do we have to store all that information on our system when we consider that to be somewhat ephemeral, just transient in terms of, I'm testing to see if it'll stick, and if it sticks, then, you'll run the true upload at that point. So I think it's an issue of mostly storage was our primary concern, why that's really not a possibility at this point. I imagine there are probably different tricks we could apply that, any good one, maybe you have an hour to reapply it or something like that. But, I think we'd have to flesh out that use case scenario a little bit more, Suzanne.
Okay. I mean, I'm talking about like immediate, like you see, yeah, it would have to be like an hour because you're not back from lunch yet. But and then maybe I should just be using upload instead of evaluate if I think it's going to, this is going to be a good data set. I was just trained to do evaluate first.
Yeah. How does Clint Eastwood always say it? Are you feeling lucky? So, I don't know. I don't have a really good answer for you because just for the reasons that I think were discussed. But if somebody has a better suggestion, we'll certainly entertain that and see how we can work it into our architecture.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions out there?
I'm wondering if information managers have already started documenting their checksums in the EML. Have you come across any tools that I failed to mention, that I failed to come across, that you sort of want to promote and say, wow, this is a great one that I use?
Wayne, I'm using hashlib in Python to try to do it all automatically there. So I'm setting up a little data table that has the checksums, and then what I'll do is check to see if the file modify date is after the most recent checksum date, and if so, I'll update the checksum, and if not, I won't, which will save me having to run through those 26 gigabyte files from time to time.
Okay, good. When you first started answering a question, there was a little noise. I couldn't quite hear what you said you're using.
This is Python with hashlib.
Oh, hashlib. Okay. Anyone else?
Let me just check here. You mentioned the fact that switching hash codes would be a bad idea if every time you hash it with a new hashing algorithm, it's going to have bad effects. but I was wondering, is MD5 sort of your preferred one? Is there any particular rhyme or reason to choosing a particular one?
Yeah, good question. I think MD5 and SHA-1 are both so common. We decided to support both, but I don't think either is necessarily preferred. I haven't had time to really explore. For example, these hash functions can take some time on large data files. I think we've seen it go for something like on say a 10 or 20 gigabyte file, it can go 5 or 10 minutes before it finally calculates that value, because it has to process that entire file to finally come up with its final value. So I don't know if MD5 is, or SHA-1 is much faster than the other. So yeah, I can't really answer the question. So it's right now I'd say it's 50-50, your choice.
Yep, I can live with that.
I'm also kind of interested in over time, as people begin to document these checksums, I'm interested in hearing from you as to whether this is strictly a manual process for you. Do you have to run a tool outside of any scripting or programming environment, and then sort of manually plug in that value, or do you have it all scripted and automated at this point? It'd be interesting to hear. John, you said you're using Python and hashlib, so that sounds like it's automated. Suzanne, I don't know, I can't remember how automated your process is up at this point.
Totally automated, yeah.
Totally,
I mean, we
good.
don't, all our EML is sort of done in the background. As we click a button, it all gets created, and the checksum happens at that point. And I know what our programmer uses. I mean, he's a .NET programmer, so probably some sort of C or whatever gets used.
So that's great, because if it's automated, that's where you're almost virtually completely bypassing any of those copy and paste errors that might happen if you were doing this manually. So
right. And we were really interested in the optimization, because anytime we make a edit to our metadata and not necessarily change the data, especially of these large files, I mean, it's just always a big ball and chain to have to upload to Pasta and
right.
wait.
And that was the trade-off here, that we know when you use this optimization, there is a slight risk of coming up with the wrong data entity if you haven't updated your checksum. But you have to weigh that against the fact that information managers aren't updating their metadata as frequently as they would like to, because of the slow speed, the amount of time and effort it takes to wait for that to complete. So hopefully this can be used judiciously and people won't get into trouble using it. Any other questions or comments?
Well, one comment, or just what you just said, kind of raised a thought in my mind, though. It just begs the question of, can we take this one step further, though? So if the data object does not change, and if we can verify that the metadata describing that object does not change, do we actually need to run that through the quality checks at all at that point? If it's, say, contact information that has only changed.
That's great.
That's great.
That's the next optimization.
Not a promise. Yeah.
We talked about this first optimization for about 2 years before we got to the point where we could implement it, and so now maybe we need 2 more years to discuss what Mark just mentioned. We're not going to ever have time to take that on, but yeah, it is something to think about.
Well, I think you'd be taking chances that was the only thing that changed. I mean, yeah. I guess you could always do a comparison of one file to the other, and then you could decide whether critical trees had changed or not. But that would be beyond our pay grade, and I'm not sure that it needs to be on our end.
Well, so that's a question. I mean, the checksum has to do with the size of the data file, right?
Well, not necessarily the size, but the content.
Content. So can't you store a checksum value in the database for an EML file?
You could, but then say you change the phone number of the, principal PI on that project, then the checksum's still going to change. So there's no way to verify whether or not it's the actual, subtree in the EML that describes the data entity.
But that shows that it changed. So that shows that you would.
But you would almost always then have to do,
yeah.
because the change is going to be binary, right? But what you could do is kind of what John said, though, and I don't know. I don't think it would be all that difficult, but I hate when I say that because it's going to bite me in the rear end. It's the, yeah, or Dwayne. But you could load, you could load the EML into the so Java objects and compare the objects to see if the values are the same in a sense. Not necessarily so what you're trying to determine is, has the semantics changed, not necessarily just the format of the XML document. And so if you can verify the semantics have not changed, even though you may have put new lines in or replaced spaces with tabs and things like that, which would effectively change checksums, then I think, you could do something. You could make that work. But I think it's a little soon to say that we could do this or we would do this. It's just like I said, it just kind of begs the question, just food for thought. But in some cases, it would incredibly improve the upload process, right? So, you would go on a diet in essence, since you wouldn't have time for lunch any longer.
Yeah, it's more challenging. Like the comparison is not as straightforward as with just comparing these checksums. And the actual, now you'd have to take sort of that block of quality checks that were previously run in a previous revision and probably incorporate them into the new quality report, and so that you could still show that the quality checks were run. It's just that they were run for a previous revision.
Yeah, the big issue would be sort of figuring out what parts of the EML document could change without having to rerun the quality checks. And I suppose you could cheat on the report and just have it print out, similar to document such and such. Look at that quality report. That would be a little easier than I think abstracting it all out there. I'm with you on not wanting to do that.
Well, good thought, but let's settle in with this particular optimization and see how it goes. And please let us know if you run into any problems with it.
Given that I'm one of the big beneficiaries, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Happy to do it. And it was kind of fun to code too, because of the logic involved.